Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my wide receiver rankings for week 5. There are a lot of players out this week, so let's get into the unranked players. Rashee Rice, I think, is definitely going on IR. He might be out for the season. We'll get more updates once the tests come in. But Puka Nacua still on IR. Cooper Kupp out for another week. They have a bye in week 6. I think they might be back in week 7. But Christian Watson is out for at least 2 weeks with his ankle sprain. Opens the door for some other players in Green Bay. But Marquise Brown on IR, Adam Thielen also on IR, and Davante Adams, if he's still a Raider by Sunday, there's no chance he's playing. He was out with a hamstring injury last week, and he's also asked for a trade. So until we find out which team he does play for, I'm not going to rank Davante Adams, but we'll see what happens as the week unfolds. There's also 4 teams on bye, so if you have any Eagles, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, you can't start them. Any Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams, also on bye. Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins of the Titans, also on bye. And Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey, and Josh Palmer of the Chargers on bye as well. None of the players on the screen are ranked in this video, so at the moment you can't start them. We'll find out about Adams, and with that, let's get into these rankings. At number 1, I am making a gut call here, and I'm putting Justin Jefferson as the number 1 wide receiver. I downgraded him a little bit last week against the Packers, and he still scored a touchdown. He scored a touchdown in every single week this season, and I think he's going to go nuclear in the Sam Darnold revenge game. I think he's popping off. I know he's facing off against Sauce Gardner. It's the Jets. It's not a good matchup, but I really don't care. Jefferson is usually matchup proof, and this week Darnold has some demons to exercise. So love the spot here. I think Jefferson's going to be fantastic, and I think Darnold's going to go ham and send him 12 plus targets. That's the only thing that's been missing for Jefferson. He has yet to have more than 8 targets in a single game this year, and that should change. In a marquee game like this in London, Jefferson will go off. So he's my number 1 this week. I definitely want him the most. Number 2, though, I have Jayden Reed at the Rams, and this is a top 7 matchup. Last week it ranked top 3, though, and the Chicago Bears were not able to capitalize, at least against the bad secondary of LA. So I think Jordan Love is going to decimate them. I think Jordan Love is going to be elite this week, and his number 1 weapon is clearly Jayden Reed. In the 2 games that Reed has played with Love as his quarterback, he is the wide receiver 1 on the season. 27.4 points per game, 7 targets per game, 5.5 catches per game for 156 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. He has an elite output this year for fantasy. He is a lock in your lineup, especially while Christian Watson is out. Jordan Love will get him the ball early and often. Even if you include the games with Malik Willis on the season, Jayden Reed is still averaging 107 yards per game total. So love his value. He's looking like a league winner right now, and he's a clear top 5 wide receiver, especially while Watson is out, maybe even when Watson comes back. So love him this week. Massive upgrade given the matchup, and I think he goes off. I was tempted to rank him at number 1, but I decided on Jefferson. At number 3, though, the wide receiver 1 on the season is Nico Collins in fantasy. He's averaging 19 points per game, 10.8 targets per game, 7.5 receptions per game for 122 yards per game with only 2 touchdowns. You would expect the wide receiver 1 to have at least 3 or 4 through 4 weeks. So very impressive numbers from Nico. He's a stud. He's not going anywhere. And I think this game is probably a shootout. They're not going to win on the back of their run game. They do not have Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in Houston. So CJ Stroud going to light it up, and I think Nico will go off. On paper, this is actually the worst matchup you could ask for wide receivers in fantasy. However, I really don't care. I am never going to downgrade Nico. He looks like he's top 5 rest of season. Number 4, I have CeeDee Lamb at Pittsburgh, and I'm not worried about him. I'm still going to rank him number 1 at some point this season, but at the moment, the volume is not as safe as we expected. He's still playing like a dog. Despite low time of possession last week, he did go over 100 total yards. And especially after their week 7 bye, I think he will click and look like the true alpha he was last season. But at the moment in this matchup against Pittsburgh, I'm giving him a slight downgrade. He's only averaging 13.7 points per game this season, and the Steelers probably do their best to limit him on Sunday night primetime. So I'm still starting him. He's still going to go off. I think he'll have a similar stat line to last week, but I do think there's higher upside for the top 3 I ranked above him. Lamb, though, is still a lock in your lineup. Number 5, if he plays, Malik Nabers is also a lock in your lineup. He's currently in the concussion protocol. He did not practice on Wednesday, so that is the only scenario where you would bench him. Monitor his health status. If he plays, though, you are definitely starting him, because this season he's been an alpha, averaging 13 targets per game, 8.8 catches for 97 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns as well. He's averaging 18.5 points per game this season. So the volume is insane. There's no sign it's going to slow down. He's clearly their best player, and he looks matchup proof already. Malik Nabers, I think, will be top 5 as long as he's healthy all year. Number 6, I have Ja'Marr Chase versus Baltimore, and the matchup is good on paper. They rank number 6, and they have gotten out to big leads the last few weeks. That really helps the game script for opposing wide receivers. But Ja'Marr Chase is not getting like elite volume this season. Only 6 targets per game, 4.8 catches for 75 yards per game, 3 touchdowns though is very important. So 14.4 points per game is solid. It's not as good as you expected. And in 2 of those games, T. Higgins was unavailable. So you expected him to play better. He's played well, but not as elite as you expected when you drafted him. So would love to see the targets be more consistent. And once that happens, I think he will return the value you expected, but he's still a lock in your lineup. He's still top 10 this season, and against a leaky secondary, I think he will be fine. The history of this matchup is not great, however. He torched them as a rookie. He was kind of average in year 2, and last year he was terrible, but Burrow wasn't healthy, so I'm not worried about this matchup. I'm kind of throwing out the stats from the last season, and I'm still starting him, but this week, he is not top 5 in the rankings. He's never going to be ranked below number 10, however. Number 7, I think we're entering a new tier here, but DK Metcalf looks like a lock in your lineup. He's looking like a stud right now. Him and Kenneth Walker are going to be a problem for opposing defenses, and the Giants defense doesn't scare you at all. Geno has looked pretty good this season, and as long as DK doesn't fumble again, he will be great. In his 4 games this year, he's averaging 14.7 points per game, 9 targets per game, 6 catches for 92 yards per game. And with 2 touchdowns, you feel pretty confident that the ceiling hits every week. So he's playing like a true alpha. Throughout his career, he has felt a little bit overhyped, not by much. He's always been good, but this year it looks like he's taken another step and he's moved up another level. So love DK right now. I think he's a lock in your lineup. But 2 other players that I think are locks in your lineup as well would be Chris Godwin and Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Bucks. This offense completely runs through them, especially while Jalen McMillan is doubtful. The touchdown is even more likely to hit, and Chris Godwin has been fantastic this season. He's averaging 8 or 9 targets every single week and has 3 touchdowns. They've both scored 3 touchdowns. And while Mike Evans has been a little bit more up and down, last week he had a big bounce back after that dud against Denver. He had 14 targets in week 4. So I think you're trusting both of them. While maybe I might be a little bit higher on one of them than what their actual output will look like when this game is over. Both players have an elite ceiling and a very high floor. I think they're both top 10 plays this week. Godwin is averaging 15.9 points per game, so he's clearly the better option this season. Evans, though, averaging 12.1, is usually a safe bet to score a touchdown, and his ceiling is too high to ignore. So really trust them. I think they're both in your lineup. I'm not benching either. Although Evans is questionable, he was limited in practice walkthroughs on Tuesday. I think it was just a veteran rest day. They play on Thursday, and I'm not worried about it. They're both good starts this week. At number 10, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. at San Francisco, and I really thought he would capitalize on an elite matchup last week against Washington while McBride was sidelined, but he was kind of disappointing. Only 6 targets, 5 catches for 45 yards. He did score a touchdown, though, and that did bail you out. You did not get burned by Marvin, but I expected more. You're definitely starting him, though, despite last week's low performance. On the season, he's averaging 14 points per game thanks to 4 touchdowns. And if you remove week 1 against Buffalo, his average in the last 3 is actually 18.3 points per game. So while you probably regret not drafting Nabers and taking Harrison instead, he has lived up to close to what your expectations were. He has been pretty good, and I think at this point he's locked into your lineup. He feels like a top 15 play every week moving forward. Number 11, I have Diontae Johnson at Chicago, and the matchup is not great. It ranks bottom 6, and the Bears have only given up 1 touchdown to the position this season. But the fact that Diontae plays with Dalton is all I need to know. He's looked like a true stud with Dalton as his quarterback in the last 2 games. Diontae is averaging 20 points per game on 13.5 targets per game with a touchdown in each of the last 2 matchups. Also an average of 103 yards per game. So he has such a high floor. He's a true stud, and I don't think the volume is really going anywhere. Maybe the Bears shut him down. They do have some good corners. The matchup is not great, but I think you have to trust him. With this type of volume, there are very few players who you trust more to never bust. So love Diontae at the moment. While Xavier Legette is rising, I still think Diontae is their best player. And him and Chuba, I think, are locked into your lineup. They're both top 11 plays for me this week at their respective positions. Number 12, though, I have Stefon Diggs versus Buffalo, and although the matchup is bad on paper, it is the worst you could ask for, I really do not give a shit. Diggs is going up against his former team, and I think here is the revenge game narrative you want to buy into. Maybe Buffalo focuses on shutting him down just to send a message, but I think that would be stupid. They need to win the game, and if you focus on Diggs, you forget about Nico Collins. They have to focus a lot more on Nico Collins. So Diggs will benefit. I know Tank Dell is looking like he will play this week, and that does kind of cap the upside a little bit, but I still think Diggs is a fantastic play. He's looked like the clear number 2 receiver while Dell was healthy, and in this game, you know for a fact they're getting him a touchdown. I think he will be begging for it all game long. They probably get it done on the first drive of the game. So love this spot for Diggs. I think he's going off, and I see maybe 10 plus targets as well. The touchdown feels like a guarantee. So if you're benching Diggs, I think you're a dumbass. No one should be benching Diggs this week. Number 13, I have Garrett Wilson at the Vikings, and the matchup has been excellent. So far this season, they rank top 4 against the wide receiver position, giving up 222 receiving yards per game to opposing wide receivers. So a big lead against San Francisco, Houston, and Green Bay is a big reason why, but we're either going to get a competitive game that's back and forth and Garrett Wilson is involved, or the Jets fall behind early, and in garbage time, Garrett Wilson gets peppered with targets. So I still trust him. I think the floor will hit. I know he hasn't looked good this season. He's been a bit disappointing. The fumble last week really did not help. But at some point, it will click between him and Rodgers. And at the moment, Davante Adams is not on the team, so he is their best weapon, and I don't think it's going to be completely a Breece Hall type of matchup here. So I do like this spot. I do think there is some high upside, and the matchup indicates Garrett Wilson could go over 100 yards for the first time this season. At some point, he will play well. It's just a matter of time. So I'm still starting him this week. I downgraded him last week, but I think this week it is a good spot. And I do think Garrett Wilson is still a player you're trusting, still top 15 moving forward. It might change, though, if they do trade for Davante Adams. We'll see about that, but for now, I would start Garrett Wilson in week 5. Number 14, though, I am trusting Brian Thomas Jr., a player I believed in entering the season, has looked fantastic through the first 4 games. And this matchup is a big upgrade. It is the number 9 matchup so far. They've given up 180 yards per game to the position, along with 4 wide receiver touchdowns. So I'm very encouraged with Brian Thomas. He's looked very impressive this season, and I still think he's kind of under the radar, could be even better, and has not gotten the credit I think he deserves because the Jags are 0-4, and there's some other rookies who are playing even better, kind of overshadowing him so far. But Thomas, in his first 4 games of the year, is averaging 12.3 points per game on 6.5 targets per game, 4.3 catches for 72 yards per game. He's been very good down the field, and he also has 2 touchdowns. He almost had a third back in week 1, but he's their best player by far. The Colts won't have an answer for him, and I think just like George Pickens last week, he's going to go over 100 yards in this game. So love Brian Thomas this week, a big upgrade in this matchup. I think he finds the end zone. He's an excellent play in week 5. Number 15, though, I have DJ Moore versus the Panthers, and I know this offense is really frustrating. The run game got going last week, but it was to the detriment of the receivers. And it was a good matchup against the Rams. So DJ Moore was a big letdown. He bailed you out with a touchdown, but did not surpass 10 points. And on the year, he's averaging only 9.2 points per game. not ideal from what we expected, but he is the leading receiver in Chicago. It's not saying much, but he's still the number one target. The ceiling has not been unlocked. However, this is the game where I think it could. He used to be a Panther. This is a revenge game for him, and I'm sure he wants to play well. I think they will get him a touchdown, and I'm sure he'll see another 9+ targets like he has consistently this year. So I think you have to trust him and continue to start him. He's not as good as I thought he would be so far, but in this game, I do think he could explode. And at some point, Caleb Williams will figure it out and DJ Moore will play well. So I'm still starting him against his former team, just like Stefon Diggs. I think he finds the end zone. I think he goes off in week 5. Number 16, though, I got Deebo Samuel versus Arizona, and Juwan Jennings' emergence makes this offense less straightforward for fantasy purposes. And it actually lowers both the floor and the ceiling dramatically, but Aiyuk is still playing poorly. So I think Deebo is still in the must-start category just because he's so talented and explosive. He can score from anywhere on the field, but he is a bit touchdown dependent. And this offense is so good, they can drop 30 points while multiple players are barely involved. And if that happens, they could take their foot off the gas if the opponent isn't competitive. So there is a little bit of risk every week, but the floor is still very high. I think last week is the baseline of what you should expect from Deebo every week. I think he's going to be fine. And at the moment, he's still the Niners wide receiver I'm most confident starting every week. He's averaging 13 points per game in 3 games this year, and I think you have to keep trusting him. His role in the run game is a very nice boost to his floor, and I don't think his role is going to change. So I'm still starting Deebo, but at number 16, he's moving down the ranks just a little bit because of the emergence of Juwan Jennings. Number 17, I have Terry McLaurin versus Cleveland, and the first 2 games were rough for Terry, but the last 2 games have been excellent. 2 straight touchdowns and an average of 8 targets per game in his last 3 is very nice. So you are no longer concerned with Terry at all. Jayden Daniels is lighting it up, and now the downfield passes are hitting for Terry. So he has a legit ceiling as well. On the season, he averages 10.2 points per game, but in his last 2, it's 16.4. So fire him up despite the Denzel Ward coverage. I think Terry will still get open, and I think he's a top 20 play this week. Number 18, in the same game, I have Amari Cooper at Washington, and on paper, this is the number 1 matchup you could ask for. They give up 39.8 points per game to wide receivers this season. 10 touchdowns to the position is what you are reading into for this matchup. There is definitely some elite upside for Amari Cooper. But last week, they were actually pretty good at stopping the Arizona Cardinals, and their season-long averages did tick down, but they still rank number 1 on the year. I'm still upgrading all receivers that face off against Washington. The only problem with Amari Cooper, though, is that despite averaging 9.3 targets per game, he's only catching 4 per game for 37 yards per game. The volume is not translating to a safe floor, and both of his touchdowns this year came in week 3 against the Giants. So without it, you're really getting unusable games from Amari this season. He could really burn you even with 24 points in week 3. His 4-game average is only 8.7, and that's literally the same as Jerry Jeudy. So you think it's an upgrade, but it's actually coming with a lot of risk. I still think you're starting Amari Cooper just because of the nature of this matchup, but just because Deshaun Watson is his quarterback makes it risky, and I don't feel super confident in this ranking. I want to upgrade him into the top 10, honestly, but the fact that he's only number 18 against Washington, a matchup I've told you to chase all year long, is why I'm a little bit worried with Amari. I think he's worth a start just because he's getting 9+ targets every week, but if he burns you again, I wouldn't be that surprised, and there is a downside with Amari Cooper. Any of the Cleveland Browns could put up terrible games with Watson at quarterback. Number 19, though, I'm starting T. Higgins this week versus Baltimore. It's a top 6 matchup. The Ravens have given up a lot of fantasy points to receivers this year, and it's good to see T. Higgins get more involved in his 2nd week back from injury. I was a bit worried about Yoshivas seeing more targets in week 3, but Higgins got 10 targets in week 4. Chase had 6, and Yoshi only had 1. So Higgins is back to the number 2 receiver clearly in this offense, and while he wasn't elite last week, 6 for 60 yards. It's not bad. On 10 targets, you'll take it. And there's some shootout potential in this game as well. Even if the Ravens get out to a big lead, the game script will definitely benefit throwing the ball. They're very good against the run, and I think Joe Burrow will have to rely on his receivers this week. So I expect similar volume for Higgins. I think he could crack double-digit targets again. And while he has had some bad games against the Ravens in his career, he usually puts up at least 60 yards, and he also has 2 games against Baltimore with 2 touchdowns in each of them. So love the upside here. Both of those games happened at home. This game is also at home, and history indicates there is some massive boom potential for him this week. So I think he's a great play. I think he's a top 20 option this week, and I think the volume is something to trust. He will find the end zone, in my opinion, and T. Higgins has very high upside in this game. I think he's a great start in week 5. Number 20, I have Drake London versus Tampa Bay, and this matchup is bottom 10. They've only given up 1 touchdown to the position this year. But London in his first 4 games this season is only averaging 10.5 points per game. But if you remember, week 1 was really bad. If you take it out, in his last 3 games, he's averaging 13.2 points per game, and that's pretty good. So I trust his floor, and he also kind of owns this matchup. The best game of his young career happened against Tampa Bay at home last season. He had 10 catches for 172 yards on 11 targets. He also had 6 for 120 yards at home as a rookie versus Tampa, and he has some really bad games on the road against them as well. So if you look into the trend that he plays well at home, bad on the road against the Buccaneers, then that means he will play well at home on Thursday night. So I think he has some very high upside. I am reading into that stat line, and I think at the worst he has a 10-point floor no matter what. So he has yet to score a touchdown against Tampa Bay, but I don't really care. I think he will go over 100 yards in this game, and I love the floor for him. I think he has a very high ceiling as well. He's also clearly the favorite target for Cousins, and while Pitts looks irrelevant, I expect them to lean on him continuously all year long. I think Drake London is starting to pay off from what we expected entering the year. I think he'll enter the top 15 rankings pretty soon moving forward, especially if he has a great game against Tampa this week. So he's top 20 for me. I think he's a very legit wide receiver 2 in week 5. Number 21, though, this ranking might sound bold, but I think Dontayvion Wicks is absolutely legit, especially this week at the Rams. The matchup is top 7. Last week it was top 3, and the Bears just didn't capitalize on this leaky secondary. So Jordan Love will go off. I think he's going to be extremely dominant in this game. And Wicks looks like a premium athlete. His skill set really fills in well for what Christian Watson does provide otherwise. So love Wicks this week. He's played very well given the opportunity in his career. And I'm not convinced he gets 13 targets every week, but that's what he got in week 4 after Watson went down. And it is possible to happen. So love the upside for Wicks. There's truly league-winning potential here. If he does maintain a wide receiver 2 role all year long, he will be fantastic. So if you can still pick him up off the waiver wire, I think you have to grab him. He's a very coveted piece. It's just a question of how long will it last once Watson comes back. But there's a chance that he overtakes Watson if he plays excellent in these next 2 games with Watson out. Then maybe Wicks will demand that he never gets taken off the field. So love the upside for him. I think you do want to chase after it in this game. And the fact that Josh Jacobs is not scoring touchdowns means the wide receivers are in a great position to score every single week. So love this matchup. It's a very good spot. They've given up 7 wide receiver touchdowns on the year. And I do think Dontayvion Wicks will have a blow up game once again. I think he's a very good flex play, and he's entering the wide receiver 2 conversation. If he gets another double-digit targets like he did last week, the ceiling is massive, and I think you want him in your lineup this week. I really trust Jordan Love to have an excellent game against the Rams. Number 22, I have George Pickens versus Dallas. And Pickens has not scored a touchdown this season, but he's still playing very well. In his 4 games this year, averaging 8.9 points per game on 7.3 targets per game, 5 catches for 69 yards is a very safe floor, and you're locking up 9 points even without the touchdown. So if it does hit, if he does find the end zone, you're getting 15 plus, and I love the upside potential in this matchup. The Cowboys do not scare me. Last week in a good matchup as well, he had 11 targets, 7 catches, 113 yards, and I do think Justin Fields is starting to gain more trust to throw it down the field in this offense. So I'm not worried about Dallas. I don't think they shut him down. Nabers played very well against them last week. So in primetime here, I think he will be featured. He's their most explosive weapon, and I think he's a good start this week. I'm a little concerned that Fields might fail to get him more than 4 touchdowns this year, but at some point it will connect and that upside will flash. So the floor is safe. The touchdown potential is viable this week. And even if it doesn't hit, you're still pretty safe with starting George Pickens. So I would start him this week. I think he's a very legit play. I want him in my lineup against Dallas. Number 23, I have Chris Olave at the Chiefs, and Olave has 3 straight games with over 80 yards receiving, but only averaging 6 targets per game on the year. He only has 1 touchdown as well, so his season average is only 10.8 fantasy points per game. But the floor is decent. I think just like George Pickens, you get a safe 8 or 9 points no matter what, but the ceiling is pretty matchup dependent. And this is a historically bad matchup to chase after, especially for number 1 wide receivers. They notoriously get shut down against the Chiefs. So I am downgrading him with this Trent McDuffie matchup that will give him some problems, but I still think Olave's talent warrants a top 25 ranking every single week, no matter what. But I actually think this might be more of a Shaheed game than an Olave game. So I don't think he scores a touchdown this week. I would lower expectations, but still trust the floor for roughly 9 points. Just like Pickens, I think he's a safe flex play no matter what. Number 24, I have Khalil Shakir at Houston, who is questionable at the moment, but I think will suit up. The matchup is top 10. The Texans defense give up 30.2 points per game to receivers and 6 touchdowns on the year. So I like that upside. Khalil Shakir has looked like the number 1 wide receiver for Josh Allen this year. Despite Keon Coleman beginning to emerge last week, I still trust Shakir as Josh Allen's favorite target. So I'm going to consistently rank him top 30, if not top 25 moving forward because of the nature of this offense. They can score 40 points any week. I think this is a shootout matchup as well. And because he plays with Josh Allen, I think you have to be starting the number 1 wide receiver in this offense. That would be Shakir, and despite only 4.8 targets per game, he is averaging 11.1 fantasy points per game with 2 touchdowns on the season. So he's not just a check down guy either. He's also put up some big plays down the field, and obviously there is some risk because it could be anyone in this offense any given week. Betting on Josh Allen, though, is worth the risk. So love his upside any given matchup. I think he is viable to give you 15 plus points. Number 25, though, I have Zay Flowers at the Bengals, and Baltimore has won with the run game the last 2 weeks, and when they're up 3 or 4 touchdowns, it's hard to justify throwing it 10 plus times to your wide receiver. So there is a lack of floor for Flowers when that happens again, but given how desperate the 1-3 Bengals are for a win, I do think this game will be more competitive and be more of a back and forth shootout than an overwhelming blowout. So Zay Flowers is still a player that is worth flex consideration. He had 21 targets over the first 2 games, and if that comes back to him, then he's an excellent play. The floor is usually pretty high. He's averaging just under 60 yards per game versus the Bengals in 2 games last year, so I think that'll probably repeat, but he did not score a touchdown in either game, and that does kind of cap his upside if he doesn't get it. So I'm balancing the risk here. He could give you like 2 points, and they could win by multiple touchdowns. It is possible he burns you for the 3rd week in a row, but he could get back on track. I think he's a still legit flex play at wide receiver 25. I think odds are he's in your lineup. Number 26 and 27, though, back to back, I have Juwan Jennings and Brandon Aiyuk of the Niners here at home versus Arizona, and all 3 Niners wide receivers are averaging between 6 to 7 targets per game this season. Jennings has played very well, while Aiyuk has looked very disappointing, so that's why I still rank Jennings 1 spot higher, but the contract they gave Aiyuk implies at some point he will get going and will be targeted much more heavily. So I still want to believe in Aiyuk's talent, but because we haven't seen it, I rank him as the 3rd least valuable wide receiver in San Francisco, but I still rank him top 30. So he's still a very legit flex play, and at some point he will pop off. The upside in this offense is too high to ignore. But with Jennings emerging, it makes both players kind of unsafe, and I really only trust Deebo for a weekly floor of at least 8 points. So one of them could burn you, one of them could also pop off for 25 plus, and that's why they're both in the top 26. So I still think you're starting both of them. Arizona is going to struggle to stop Brock Purdy here, so I think they will score 30 plus points again, and one of these players will probably find the end zone. It's just a question of which one do you trust the most. I think you feel more safe with Jennings, but the upside is too high to ignore Aiyuk. At some point, he will pop off. So I still think you're starting both of them, but we'll see. Hopefully we get more clarity after this week. Number 28, I have JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba versus the Giants. And if I told you Geno Smith would throw for just under 400 yards last week and JSN would get 12 targets, you would probably think he was in line for an elite game. But last week, he only caught 8 for 51, 9.1 points is fine, but it feels like there was a lot of meat left on the bone for JSN. He nearly had a touchdown, but the defense was too good. It did prevent him from capitalizing in the end zone. So JSN isn't going to be a focal point every week, but he does look like he's more involved than Tyler Lockett. And at some point, the touchdown will hit and you will get a big blow-up game from JSN. But for now, it just hasn't quite happened. The volume, though, is trustworthy. An average of 8.3 targets per game is something you want to lead into, and it's why I rank him top 30. I think he's still a very legit flex, a player you're probably still betting on and just hoping to find the end zone. He's a good flex play moving forward, but maybe the ceiling is capped in this offense, especially if Kenneth Walker hoards 3 touchdowns. Number 29, though, I have Xavier Worthy versus New Orleans, and on one hand, he's in line to be the number 1 receiver for Mahomes. That's very valuable. But on the other hand, he'll get the Marshawn Lattimore coverage this week, and he might get completely shut down. Lattimore can really stop you from playing well. So his speed makes him a legit factor. It's too fast to ignore, and he can also break a touchdown from anywhere on the field. Just like last week, he could have a 50-yard house call at any point this week. So I still think you're starting him. The upside is too high, but especially as the targets share is going to consistently increase, you do feel safer with his floor. So you got to balance the risk involved, but the ceiling is very high. I think it's worth it. And at wide receiver 29, I think he is a start-worthy flex this week. Number 30, another player I think I'm starting is Rashid Shaheed in the same game at the Chiefs. And the same risk-reward ratio applies for Shaheed. Shaheed only has 1 bad game this year, but when it was bad, it was literally a bagel. So you have to understand there is extreme risk with Shaheed. But in the game after the bagel, last week, he followed up with 11 targets, 8 catches for 83 yards, and that was a very good sign. So I think I trust him. I think while yes, he can burn you, the upside is too high. He has 12 plus points in the 3 other games this season, and the touchdown could happen just like Xavier Worthy from 50 plus yards out. So I think you do want to start him. I do think the chance at the home run swing is too enticing, and I do think he's a very legit flex play. I wouldn't be shocked if he has a better game than Chris Olave this week. The Chiefs notoriously shut down number 1 wide receivers. So despite the risk, I think you are starting Shaheed in week 5. I think you're also starting Christian Kirk versus the Colts this week. It's a very good matchup. It's definitely an upgrade. They've given up 180 yards to the position per game this season. So really good matchup. He's back to being established in the offense. He has 2 straight games with at least 10 targets and at least 7 catches, 70 yards per game with a touchdown over the last 2 games. So he's earned your trust. Historically, the Jaguars win this matchup at home as well. So I think he'll be solid. He kind of needs a touchdown to really pay off, but 2 straight games with over 11 half PPR points is what we expected from him when we drafted him around wide receiver 30 entering the year. So I'm back to ranking him here. He's a good floor play, and I do trust the volume to continue, especially while Evan Ingram remains on the sideline. Number 32, I have Romeo Doubs at the Rams, and if you haven't noticed, I really think the Packers receivers are going to kill it this week. Jayden Reed is a top 5 guy. Wicks, I think, is a legit wide receiver 2. But even Doubs has very legit flex appeal. I think his floor will be solid, and inevitably touchdowns will come his way. So there's room for all 3 to feast in this matchup. There's 20-point upside with every single Packers receiver. So with Christian Watson out, you have to trust the floor, and Jordan Love could lock on to Romeo Doubs this week. It was Wicks last week. It could pivot to anyone else any given week. So love the upside. Doubs scored 8 touchdowns last year, and I think at some point he'll get back in the end zone. He could score multiple times this week and really be a week-winning play in this matchup. So love him in DFS, but at wide receiver 32, I think he's a very legit flex play. I do think he's worth starting. I'd much rather start him than any running back I rank outside the top 24. This week, running back is gross, and I think wide receiver has all the depth. Romeo Doubs is a perfect example of a plug in your lineup. At flex this week, I think he's a very good play. Should go over 10 points. Number 33, I have Wan'Dale Robinson at Seattle, and it feels kind of crazy to rank him here with a few names I haven't mentioned yet, but the volume is too high to ignore for Wan'Dale. 14 targets last week, an average of 9.5 targets per game this season, and although he's just a check down option, I think it will continue because they don't really have a run game, and his short passes kind of act as an extension of the run game. So Malik Nabers obviously going to be double teamed on the majority of plays this week. Robinson is a key part of their offense, and there's a chance that Nabers gets ruled out with a concussion. So you're definitely getting a ton of volume here. I think the floor will continue. He's had at least 8.8 points in every single game this year, and he looks bust proof, averaging 10 points per game through 4 games. So love the floor for Wan'Dale, especially in full PPR. He's even more valuable, but even in half, he is a very safe option. Number 34, I have Jordan Addison versus the Jets, and now is where I think you're just looking for upside. There is some more risk that enters the convo, but Addison has some really high potential. He had a massive game last week with 2 touchdowns, 21.4 points, but he only got 4 targets, and one of his touchdowns was a rushing touchdown as well. How often is that going to repeat? But I would like to see him increase the volume before I fully endorse him. He only had 4 targets in week 1 as well before going down with an ankle injury and missing 2 games. And I do think this is more of a Justin Jefferson type of game. So Jefferson's volume has not been crazy this year. And if it does tick up, then how many more targets are you going to see for Addison? I do think Darnold will only keep one player viable most of the time, but there's so much upside in this offense. Kevin O'Connell can always dial up great plays, and Darnold has looked fantastic this year. So he's not a clear must start. In a bad match against the Jets, I'm probably going to bench him, but if you're just chasing upside, doing it with Addison is not a bad bet. Same goes for Tank Dell. Really high upside in this matchup against Buffalo, but he's had a pretty slow start to the season. He did miss last week with injury, so he's not the safest play, but we're factoring in legit risk at this point with all players, and very few guys at this point have as much upside as Tank Dell ranked lower. So he's still in the flex conversation for me. Inevitably, he will find the end zone and have a massive game. He did not play last week, and in a revenge game for Diggs, you would expect Dell to likely take a back seat as he gets healthier. But I think this week I'd much rather just bet on Diggs, but I still believe in Dell. He's an interesting buy low candidate as his value has definitely cratered since the draft. Number 36, though, I got Xavier Legette at Chicago, and the matchup is bottom 6, but I think that's more so a concern for Diontae Johnson than Legette. It was very exciting last week. He had 10 targets, also got involved in the run game, and scored a touchdown. His horseback riding celebration feels very on point for his personality, but it's fun to root for him. The team is very invested in his success. He's a first-round draft pick after all, and while I do love what I'm seeing, I want to see the volume continue before I fully endorse him top 30, but there is a world where he looks fantastic in this game with another 10 targets. If Diontae gets shut down, you could see Dalton lock on to Legette. So I think he's a great pickup. I think long-term, as a first-round pick, rookie, they want to get him involved, and he will offer some more upside as the weeks go by, as he gets more established in this offense. So love his potential. I think he could be a league winner as we get further in the season, but for now, I think you're probably not safe enough to start him. He does have upside, though. At the very least, pick him up off the wire if you can. Number 37, though, another wide receiver 2 in an interesting offense with a tough matchup. Darnell Mooney versus Tampa Bay. The matchup is bottom 10, and I do think this is more of a Drake London game for the most part. But Mooney has been consistently involved in this offense, at least 6 targets in each of the last 3 games, and he's also being targeted deep down the field, and in the red zone, he does have 1 touchdown so far. He's averaging 9 points per game this season, and he's a legit flex play every single week. Especially as Kyle Pitts continues to struggle, Mooney could have another great game. He does have some upside, not a bad play any given week. Number 38 and 39, though, I have both Dolphins receivers, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, back-to-back at New England, and it's just not a safe play without Tua. With Tyreek Hill, I was encouraged that Taylor Huntley would get him the ball, but maybe the Snead matchup was just too much to overcome, and now he gets New England, who usually takes him out of the game entirely. I know that was while Belichick was the coach, but if Mayo knows what's good for him, he will be adopting the same strategy. It's the only way they have a chance to beat the Dolphins, and I do worry he gets double teamed and taken out of the equation in this game. As a member of the Dolphins the last 2 years in New England, Tyreek Hill does have one touchdown, but is maxed out at 55 yards on 5 or fewer catches in those 2 games, and that was with Tua at quarterback. So it's not going to look good this week. I genuinely think you can bench Tyreek if you want. With this ranking, he's not a safe play. I am recommending you bench him. The offense is just too inept to trust either player. But Waddle is in the exact same camp as Tyreek. I do not expect the Patriots defense to focus on him as much, but neither will Huntley. So both of these players feel neutered right now. You're pretty desperate for a touchdown with both of them. And with Huntley in week 4, they both had similar volume, both had 4 catches, both scored about 5.5, 6 points. And you're pretty desperate for a touchdown here. It's unlikely to hit, and I'm trying to bench both of them until Tua comes back. Number 40, a player I'm also benching, Michael Pittman at Jacksonville. It's the quarterback situation, why you don't trust him. And it's a bummer because this matchup is top 5. The Jags allow 194 yards per game to the position, almost 35 points per game to receivers, and 5 touchdowns on the year to the position as well. So I would be far more excited to start Pittman if Joe Flacco was the quarterback. I'd probably rank him top 15 in that scenario. But with Richardson, I just don't think you can feel safe about it. It's not guaranteed that he plays, though. You want to monitor Richardson's health status, because if Flacco does play, Pittman is a must start. But until we know for sure, I just don't think you can feel good about it. Despite seeing 7.3 targets per game, Pittman has not looked good. He's only averaging 7.2 points per game, and that includes 14 last week, while Richardson was not on the field. So I just don't trust him. I really don't trust Richardson to get him the ball consistently. And even in a good matchup, they have historically lost to Jacksonville on the road here. So I don't think he goes over 100 yards. I really worry about the floor, and I don't think the touchdown hits. You're pretty desperate for it. I'm probably benching Michael Pittman with Richardson at quarterback, but with Flacco, I'm definitely starting him. We'll see what happens. I'll update this rank on Saturday. Number 41, though, I have Tyler Lockett versus the Giants, and Lockett got another 9 targets last week. It was less than JSN, but Lockett had more fantasy points. He's not going away. He's a decent floor play every week, and if he scores a touchdown, you'll be very happy you started him. He's not someone you really get hyped up about in your lineup, though, but he does deserve more credit. He's still playing very well at the age of 32, and if you do start him, I don't think you're crazy. I think from a floor standpoint, Lockett is very safe. Number 42, I have Keon Coleman at Houston, and I really liked what I saw from him in week 4. His connection with Allen is starting to develop. The volume in this offense, though, is still pretty sporadic and hard to trust. There's not enough to fully buy into yet, but the upside with the Bills any week keeps you interested. And we expect a high-scoring game here versus the Texans, so Keon has some appeal. You're probably benching him, but he does pique my interest. I would pick him up off the wire if he is available. Number 43, I have Rome Odunze versus the Panthers, and it's kind of unfortunate that Keenan is healthy, at least for Rome, because now there's too many mouths to feed, and it kind of stunts Odunze's development. But in a revenge game for DJ Moore, I doubt many other players offer much value here. Caleb is still too inconsistent to bet on multiple Chicago wide receivers, and they've all been kind of disappointing so far this season. So I'll bench him unless Keenan Allen gets hurt again. I don't think you're getting a solid, safe enough target share with Rome. And while I do still believe in him long-term, for now it's just too shaky to trust. I'll keep him on the bench. Number 44, though, I got Jacoby Myers at Denver, and the matchup is bottom 3. The Broncos have only given up 1 touchdown to the position this year and only 106 yards per game to wide receivers as well. So while, yes, he looks like the number 1 wide receiver in Las Vegas for the rest of the year, as they're probably going to trade Devontae Adams, he's not good enough to play well every week against elite corners. And Surtain is going to lock him up this week, so I'm really not excited to trust him. Maybe the volume leads to 8+ targets, but this is not the game to trust Myers. I think he's definitely staying on the bench against the Broncos. Number 45, in the same game, though, I have Cortland Sutton versus Las Vegas, and Sutton is probably the only Bronco you would even consider starting given the state of their offense. But he's very touchdown dependent, and even if he gets 12 targets, he could still burn you with less than 50 yards, and I have not seen enough from Bo Nix to fully trust Courtland Sutton. But this could be the game where he starts to really build his confidence as a thrower. I do think Nix has some sneaky upside in this game, and Sutton is the only player that actually puts up stats for fantasy. But only in DFS would I consider it as like a contrarian play. I really do not trust any Bronco in my lineup. Number 46, though, I have Juju Smith-Schuster versus the Saints, and I might be going out on a limb here, but I do believe that Juju might have weekly value rest of season because we know that Rashid Rice is going to be missing probably the full year. I do believe it's a torn ACL. We'll get that confirmed in the coming days, but Worthy is still a developing rookie. He's not someone that you can rely on to get 10 plus targets and pay off every single week. So somebody else has to step up. Unless they trade for another player on another team, then it has to be someone in-house. And I do not trust Justin Watson. I think it is Juju. He's the most likely candidate for that to happen. And he played well in the Chiefs offense 2 years ago. He does have some chemistry with Mahomes. And now that he's getting practice reps as a very involved receiver, I do think he will play well. So yes, I could be wrong. I know there's some risk here. This rank accounts for that, but Kelsey doesn't look the same this season, and the volume can't just all go to Worthy. So Juju has a chance to step up. He could be a weekly flex play with upside, and I wouldn't write him off completely. I think he's a very good waiver wire pickup this week, if still available. His price might be a lot higher after the Saints game on Monday night if he pops off. So keep him in mind. Don't dismiss him, but obviously he's not the safest bet. It is still Juju at the end of the day. Number 47, I have Keenan Allen, though, versus the Panthers, and there's just too many mouths to feed in Chicago, and Caleb is not consistent enough to get everyone involved. Maybe Keenan plays well, but it's a revenge game for DJ Moore, and I would be fading Allen this week. I would definitely bench him until he has a good game. Number 48, though, I have Tutu Atwell versus the Packers, and this is a top 8 matchup. The Green Bay defense has given up 6 touchdowns to the wide receiver position in 4 games, so there is some high upside here. But now we're just getting pretty desperate, and Tutu, while he is playing relatively well in the absence of Cooper Kupp, is just not a player I really feel confident starting in my lineup. So in DFS, he's interesting, but unless you're really desperate, I doubt it. I'd much rather roll with a guy off the waiver wire like Legette or Dontayvion Wicks, or even Juju Smith-Schuster, who I do rank 1 spot above. So he's not the worst bet. There is some possible garbage time here, and the matchup is good, but I just don't feel good about betting on any particular Rams wide receiver, and it could be someone else this week. Tutu is not the safest bet, but he is my preferred option of the Rams weapons, other than Kyren Williams, of course. Number 49, though, I have Jerry Jeudy at Washington, and this is the number 1 matchup on paper. Definitely a spot you want to be chasing, but I just don't really trust any player that suits up with Deshaun Watson. Like, it's just really a tough spot, and Amari Cooper has been getting all the targets that you trust, but both players actually have averaged the same amount of fantasy points. Jerry Jeudy could actually have an excellent game this week against Washington, but David Njoku might return as well, and that would definitely cap his upside. So I'm just going to avoid it. I don't feel confident in betting on multiple Browns receivers, even in a good spot. I don't want to bet on Deshaun Watson. So I'm going to bench him. I could be wrong about it, but I think it's the safer, wiser decision to play it safe and bench Jerry Jeudy. But at number 50, this ranking will change on Saturday. I promise you that. But Josh Downs is very interesting, maybe an excellent pickup off the wire, because Joe Flacco might get the start. At the moment, Anthony Richardson is not a guarantee to play, and if Flacco starts, you would probably consider Josh Downs in the same tier as Christian Kirk. I would probably rank him right around wide receiver 30, right above Christian Kirk, if you told me that Flacco was the starter. He looked great last week, and both him and Pittman are very legit starts if the quarterback play is consistent. If you can get a catchable ball every single time, then these receivers will hit. But you just can't trust Richardson to do that consistently so far, and I don't think you can start Josh Downs at all if Richardson is the quarterback. So this ranking will change. It will either be vaulting up 20 spots or moving down outside the top 60. We'll find out, but keep an eye on him. He might be a week-winning player if Flacco gets the start. I normally give you 60 players at receiver, but there's a lot of buys this week, so I'm just going to rip through these last 10 names. Not going to go into depth here, but they are names to consider. They could pop off given their situation. Jalen Tolbert looks like he'll step up as Brandon Cooks has some an infection in his knee. Brandon Cooks is not available moving forward. Number 52, Jordan Whittington could be more involved than Tutu Atwell, but it's not that safe of a play. Alan Lazard and Mike Williams are kind of on equal footing right now, but they might lose all value if they do add Devontae Adams into the mix. Number 55, I have Ray McLeod, who's actually more involved than Kyle Pitts at the moment, so that's shocking, but he's interesting. Michael Wilson had a bit of a dud last week in a good game with a fumble, but he could see a lot of targets. It is possible, although McBride is coming back, I doubt it. Andre Yoshivas, you're just hoping for a touchdown, but I'm not willing to completely give up on him. He is still interesting in this Bengals offense. Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk, you don't really want to bet on the Patriots offense, but they are somewhat interesting. You could luck into a touchdown with one of them. And then lastly, Gabe Davis could have a deep target. There is some room for an explosive play against the Colts. It's a bad secondary, good matchup for Gabe. So those are my wide receiver rankings this week. Here are the top 60 on the screen. My expectations are elite when it comes to starting anyone in the top 7. I think anyone through DK Metcalf will be popping off this week. There's some really high upside, and the floor is very safe. Maybe one of Chris Godwin or Mike Evans doesn't score a touchdown, but they're both really good. That's why I have them in a tier below. But I think them all the way through George Pickens, I think, can give you 15 plus points this week. I think the touchdown probably hits for these players, but even without it, the floor is very safe, too high to bench, and they're all must starts in your lineup this week. So really good depth at receiver. I think Chris Olave all the way through Wan'Dale Robinson have extremely high floors and offer very good depth at receiver. I think you do want to be starting receiver at flex this week. Running back is very ugly once you get outside the top 20. So trust receiver this week. I do want to be starting most of them. And once you hit Jordan Addison, Tank Dell, that's where the risk steps in, and that's where it does become a little bit more touchdown dependent. So I'm still interested in some of those names outside the top 33, but I am probably benching them after that point. It does feel like a very risky proposition. So good luck to you. I do think wide receiver will have a lot of good games this week, and that is the position to be flexing in your lineup. But that's going to be it for me in this video. If you have any questions, let me know down below in the comment section. But like and subscribe for more content like this. My name is Adam Riancho. I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.